Hi everyone. Today is the 29th of January 2022 and I'm making this video because I've been asked the same question for the last few days over and over again on all different platforms. The same question. And when I was asked this question, it's like I'm a question triggered channel. So when somebody asks a question, that usually triggers a response immediately. And I see everything and the information comes either from the 9 or from my own psychic sight, and I'll see multiple levels and everything opens up. But I was being asked this question over and over and there was nothing coming. I was looking at the situation and just seeing a 3D reality with nothing behind that. So I couldn't look deeper and see the whys and wherefores of this situation and respond to the question. And I thought, what's wrong with me? Why can't I tune in on this? Why am I getting no answer? Now, whether this is to do with the way the question was asked, because I know that pretty much everyone asking the question was coming from quite a desperate need, maybe not everyone, but many that were asking this question were coming from quite a desperate need to know the answer. And that desperation to need to know the response, to need to know the answer, is a block to that energy. I didn't feel that. I didn't have any desperate need to know the response. I was just acting as the conduit, the medium between the person asking the question and the information, but nothing was coming. And I thought, I'm going to have to try to tune in on this. And I did. And again, nothing was coming, and nothing was coming from the 9. They hadn't commented on it until today. Someone asked the same question, but they asked this question in such a way that it was specific to the novel that I'm working on, The Bifurcated Village, and presenting that scenario within the village domain, within the village environment of that novel, that hermetically sealed story. Instantly everything opened up before me and I could see all the layers, and the 9 were there and were speaking to me. So that was great. So I've been analysing this as a separate issue. Is it because the hermetic seal is so in place right now that is the space within which for me to be able to go forward and view the landscape of multidimensionality and connect with the 9 from there? Is it because of the hermetic seal being so multi-layered that there is, if you will, a protective element for future events and eventualities within that? Interestingly enough, in my dream last night, just randomly, the person who wrote the article, the original article for vice.com about me, she was in my dream, and she was kind of not really apologizing, but she was just saying, look, it's not personal. This is my job. I'm just doing my job. I've written articles about hundreds of people. It's not personal to you at all. And I was thinking, well, that's not the point. But anyway, that was my dream. And then of course I had this situation where more people were asking this question and nothing was coming until the question was asked from within the central point of that hermetic seal. So I feel that we are looking at censorship timelines that have not yet resolved and are still in place. So hermetic seals are in place for me as a storyteller and as an individual delivering information. And for you, for every single person watching this, there is a hermetic seal in place for you for what you do in your everyday life. So that doesn't mean you can't speak. It doesn't mean you can't be part of that indigo uprising, that revolution, but everything is done within sacred space if you allow it to, if you go with the flow of that. So thankfully, this person asked the question in that way, specific to the novel, and that opened things up for me. So thank you to the person who asked the question. And the question that has been asked is, Magenta, in the novel, does a procession of chariots driven by the villagers, arrive at one of the villages. Did the idea for this procession come from the villagers themselves or from one of the dark overlords? My feeling is, and this is the question still, my feeling is that the idea may have come from one of the dark overlords, but that the power of the positive energy of the villagers and the Fae will turn this into a positive event. So that's the question. And as soon as I read this, everything opened up. And what I was seeing was this duality of opinion, of awareness, and many, many people looking at this situation, many focusing on this situation, many who understand the agendas and where the truth is and where the truth is not, and also remote viewing and psychic individuals looking into this situation and penetrating it. And what I see here is predominantly a real bifurcation, which is understandable because we are right in the middle of the bifurcation energy right now, in multiple ways. So what I'm seeing is on one level, you've got individuals saying this is a dark overlord agenda, and the whole thing has been scripted and planned and is part of that, part of the problem, reaction, solution situation. And then you have over on the other side, individuals saying this is the taking of the power, the sovereignty, the standing against the regime, the Indigo uprising. This is truth, this is freedom, freedom, freedom. So you've got these two bifurcated perspectives. And of course, they're both correct. And in and of themselves on their own, they're both incorrect. So this was my reply. And I said here, I posted this on social media and actually said mine and the Nine's reply, because the Nine were with me as soon as I read this question. And I was so pleased because everything opened up. I thought, finally I can see this situation and I can actually respond. And the Nine were with me. So this response is myself and the Nine together. Your feelings are correct. So that's specific to my feeling is the idea may have come from one of the dark overlords, but that the power of the positive energy of the villagers and the Fae will turn this into a positive event. Your feelings are correct. However, in the original organic timeline, this came from the villagers. I will go through and analyze this further once I've read the response. The overlords had technology to view the future timeline probabilities. They saw the procession of chariots, just as they saw many other aspects of the Indigo uprising and revolution. After many attempts at trying to change the timelines, they realized they could not do that. May I remind you here, we are discussing a novel, a fictional story. The only thing they could do was attempt to take control of it, to hijack it. This is what is occurring with every Indigo uprising movement across the world of the village in all domains. Once the prophesied event takes place, then the chess game begins, light versus dark. So in real time, we are watching or reading in the novel, the chess game play out. Dark wins or light? A light win looks like a backfire on the dark, which is what is occurring with the convoy of chariots into the Khanadarian domain in the village. The dark are using this to their advantage to further their agenda of overlord removal at each domain's governmental level, so they can replace so-called independent councils in each domain with a one village government rule that is out in the open instead of behind the scenes. For the light, we have far more awakening, more sovereignty, more unity, more awareness, more truth, and a breaking through the mainstream media wall in the village, leading to the New Earth Society or the New Village Society. Also, a unity council at world governmental levels, but structured very differently to the Dark's intentions. The positive faction, New Earth, are creating a White Knights of the Round Table structure and a Robin Hood society. Many individuals are very focused on the arrival of the Khanadarian domain Procession of Chariots, and for good reason, as this triggers a huge domino effect within the overall global Indigo uprising. Yet this is one such movement of many as you go forward in your linear time space. Celebrate the expansion of and the connection to the light, but at all times be aware of the dark structures, tactics, and agendas. The false awakening and true awakening tied up and intertwined within the same event. Those of you in human incarnation, look for the duality or the polarity in all things. Is this the light or the dark? Is this the negative or the positive? Just as you say to the questioner, this is both. Seeded by one faction and taken over and continued by the other, yet in truth it is a simultaneous movement, signifying the galactic and planetary energetics, that of duality and unity, the twin flame and the trinity as one ever-evolving geometry. This year, your year of 22, is the year where this shall be seen in multiple ways, both personally and globally across your world. So that was the response to that. So I'm going to break this down. So the response, your feelings are correct. My feeling is the idea this may have come from one of the Dark Overlords. So from that perspective, the Dark Overlords created on the 3D level in this timeline, this event, this procession of chariots. So whether they infiltrated groups, Indigo uprising groups, warrior groups, creating let's do this, let's do that, or whether they were in the industry itself of the chariot riders and seeded it from there. I'm not sure where the seed came from, and that's kind of not the point. The point is that this was in 3D reality in this timeline. This was seeded by the overlords, by the dark structure. This didn't come from the everyday person. They caught on to this momentum and like, yes, this is a good idea. Let's do this, let's do that. So then you have a mix of individuals, with the majority being individuals of the light, because the minority is always the darkness or the negative or the positive, whichever way you want to look at it. So that's correct in this 3D reality timeline. But in the original organic timeline, this came from the villagers. So let me explain. The original timeline that was projected to play out was this event with the chariots going into the Khanadarian domain and chariots elsewhere in other domains, worldwide chariots, worldwide walks, worldwide Indigo uprising, the whole thing. That was organic and created and seeded by the villagers, the fae, the people. In the original timeline, that is what was the pre-matter template to manifest. And that's been playing out for, in linear time, many, many, many years, potentially hundreds of years, if not thousands, depending on what the technology is to view future timelines. So thousands of years ago, it would be remote viewing, plant medicines, meditations, ceremonial, all sorts of ways to view into future timelines. But then as we go sort of further into the future, not so far back, there was a technology. Some people know this as a mirror, a looking glass. Some people know this as a cube or a box connected perhaps to the planetary system Orion. What I'm seeing is, yes, those, but other little technological systems as well, all connected to this ability to quantum view in various ways, mathematically and visually, depending on the sophistication of that technology. So the timelines were viewed by the Dark Overlords, and they saw the organic play out that was created by the people. And they saw this culminating within an eventuality and an inevitability. So they tried multiple different ways, multiple different views, switching this and switching that and changing this and changing that to try to come to another outcome, because that's what they'd done before. Since before this technology was available, when Dark Overlords just had remote viewing, group remote viewing, they've always done something to shift the timeline into a play out that served their agenda. And I'm talking about hundreds, if not thousands of years. So to actually get to a point where there was nothing they could do to shift the outcome because it was an inevitability was incredibly frustrating, to put it mildly, for the Dark Overlords, because they felt like the time, and they knew that their time as a 3D ruling class, if you will, behind the scenes, they knew that that timeline would come to an end. They knew that that reign was finite, but their aim was to extend it as long as possible. That still is their aim. And they know that they can't shift it or change it, but they always felt that they could superimpose upon it, hijack it, and control it, as in lead it. But because they couldn't actually shift this particular eventuality, it was there in every timeline, and in all timelines seeded by the people, there was only one real solution, and that was for them to seed the very thing that the people were going to seed, and use that, knowing that the people would be on board with this, knowing that there would be a great awakening, but to use that. And again, I remind you, I'm discussing fiction, I'm discussing the novel, we're talking about a fantasy fiction, potentially with sci-fi in there as well, urban fantasy fiction, which goes under the working title at the moment of the Bifurcated Village. That's what we're discussing here. And any connection to real events or real people is purely coincidental. So what they looked at here was a scenario where they could take this great awakening, this indigo uprising, and use it to their advantage. So instead of trying to change the outcome, they stayed with the outcome, but they decided that they would create the outcome before the people did. So what that does is it matches the organic eventuality. So nature, if you think, if you will, the cosmos, the intelligence of the God particle, God force, consciousness field would be, what's the word, would be appeased, if you will, and that's not the right word, would be that it would work with nature so that nature wouldn't need to shift into this eventuality, which the timelines are hurtling towards as an inevitability, as a singularity. So they decided to take control of that and seed it for themselves. So if they seeded it for themselves, then they could control it. That was the hope. And then they would then look at the seeding of these events as part of problem, reaction, solution. More than likely taking this as problem, reaction, and then steer it in a way so that they can still get the solution that they wanted all along. So that was the plan. And of course, this has been scuppered in multiple ways since they first saw this, predominantly through Mr. T taking place over in the US domain as the top banana position. That changed a lot of things as well. Still, they are working with the original agenda, and they've got multiple different ways they can play that agenda. So I've been talking about in the last couple of videos the false awakening and how that's tied in with the true real Great Awakening. And it's not just as if the false awakening is in one domain and the real awakening is in another. And yes, that is happening. But it's also that the false awakening and the real awakening are tied up in the same event. So this particular situation with the convoy of chariots, this is a perfect example of the false awakening and the real Great Awakening in the same event, which is why you have this bifurcation of one group of people saying it's the dark structure that's doing this, don't fall for it, it's all part of their agenda, it's all part of their play out, don't buy into it. Well, they're right, but you have to take on board the other side of this bifurcation, the other perspective. This is the Great Awakening, this is freedom, this is people taking back their rights, standing for what they believe in, sovereignty. That's true as well. But if you only take that perspective, you are missing the dark side. It's both. It's both. It's both. It's both. I don't know how more I can say that it is both tied up in one thing. It is not one or the other. It's both, and it will be, because that's the pattern of our galactic universal structure right now. And that is what, when the Nine sort of came into this response, and that's exactly what they draw my attention to when they're merging with me and communicating through me as I'm answering someone's question. So as I said, as I've explained, the overlords had technology to view the future timeline probabilities. They saw the procession of chariots. So they saw all of the Indigo uprising events that are yet to come, that, you know, we're only in 2022, there's more to come, and they saw it. They saw it all and where it leads. And they saw that it was in all timelines and realized it was a singularity event. Just as they saw many, many, many other aspects of the Indigo uprising and revolution. So emphasizing on the many, this is one of many, there's loads more to come, and all of them will have this negative, positive, bifurcated aspect to it. Because if the light seeds something, the dark step in and hijack it. If the dark seeds something, it's flipping, it's backfiring, and it's becoming an event for the light. So this is why the Nine have told me that this year in 2022, we have this 50-50 play out, because we've got a bifurcation that we can really see now. Bifurcation's been in place for quite some time, most especially as we entered into 2022 with the coming in of the attempted village takeover in the novel. But now we're really seeing this. We're really seeing the optics of this 50-50 play out. We're seeing the bifurcation in multiple ways, even within the aware community. As I said, we have aware individuals who know this is all part of the dark. It's a false awakening. It's all part of their agenda. They created it, problem, reaction, solution. They're aware and they're right. And then you've got the other group of people, freedom, standing for sovereignty. We will not put up with this. We will make a stand for this, this, and this. This is a great move for the positive. Let's cheer these warriors on that are riding in these chariots. And they're all correct as well, and they're all aware. So we've got a bifurcation even in the aware truth movement. And we have a bifurcation in our own selves, which is all part of our catalyst into finding unity within our own selves, and all part of the ascension process, which is why this is happening and how we can liken it to multiple levels. So after many attempts at trying to change the timelines, they realized they couldn't do it. So that's what I've already discussed. The only thing they could do was attempt to take control of it, to hijack it. This is what's occurring with every Indigo uprising movement across the world of the village in all domains. So every Indigo uprising event has been seeded by the dark structure, or if something else pops in that the light creates, they're attempting to hijack that. But the majority have been seeded by the dark structure because originally in the organic timeline, without infiltration that they viewed, it was all seeded by the Fae, the people, the villagers. So in this reality, in the actual physical play out that we're in this timeline, they have decided to take over the seeding of that exact same event so that they could control it. So I know it's complicated and complex. And this is why I think many people are only seeing one side of the awakening or the other. But there are those that can see that this is bifurcated and that this does contain both of these. White hat, dark hat, light, dark, white, black, negative, positive, whichever word you want to use. It's nothing to do with color or race or any kind of belief system. It's just a pattern to explain the bifurcation and the polarity that's playing out as we move into unity. So once the prophesied event takes place, then the chess game begins. So as soon as the event takes place, so if it's the movement of the chariots coming into the Khanadarian domain, then the chess game begins, because the prophesied event is now on track. It's happening. That which they saw in the technology many, many, many years ago, here it is. It's prophesied because it's been seen. If something has been seen in a timeline in a future, whether it's through remote viewing from the negative side, the positive side, or whether it's through technology, it's a prophecy. It's a prophecy once it's been seen and spoken of, and that can be a prophecy through the dark negative side, or it can be a prophecy through the light. Prophecy in and of itself is simply a way to describe that which has been seen, that which has been observed. And when something has been observed, it wants to then come to fruition. It wants to manifest. It must manifest, which is why the negative structure can't change it, because them viewing it made it set. So the negative structure created the eventuality. And because they viewed so many times and overused this technology, they inadvertently, from the fourth dimensional level, they created the singularity, which already existed from the multidimensional higher than 5D and beyond into source consciousness. That already existed, but from the fourth dimensional and third dimensional level, they created it by observing it. So the Nine said to me several years ago, when it came to chess, using chess as an analogy, they said they have checkmated themselves, and I didn't really understand what that meant. Now, whilst that referred somewhat to Mr. T, because he tied up things so that he moved into a checkmate situation, it was also to do with the viewing of the eventualities, viewing the timelines, becoming the observer, and therefore the guaranteed manifester of what they were observing. But prior to that, they were able to change it for two reasons. One, it hadn't come to the timing of the singularity. So whatever is viewed closer to the singularity sets in the timeline. So previous to that, they had more leeway for change, if you will, because everything they did was always still leading towards the singularity anyway. But back then, they also hadn't overused the technology. So the more they used the technology, the more they were creating what they were seeing. So it's a paradox. It's a paradoxical situation. That which was already in place was created by those who were trying to stop it. That's basically the truth. And if you can apply that conundrum or paradox to everything that's going on right now, you'll be able to see it play out before your very eyes. And it's very, very clear when you see it. If you have that catalyst to open up that inner sight. And I didn't have that with all these sort of quite desperate questions. Please, Magenta, can you comment on this? And again, Magenta, could you please comment on this situation? Exclamation mark. Finally, someone asked the question about the village, about the novel, about the story, about the chariots. And because it was not presented with desperation, but with enjoyment of the journey within, as we walk with the story, bang, 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 everything opened up for me. And then the 9 were there. So I'm telling you this because this is how it works for all of us, not just me. We're all question triggered when we're in that flow with our own DNA signature. So in real time, we are watching, reading in the novel, the chess game play out dark winds or light. So a light wind looks like a backfire on the dark. So when what the dark are trying to do, when what the negative are trying to do, it backfires on them and turns out as a win for the positive, if you will. That's what is meant by a backfire. And that's what's occurring with the convoy of chariots in the Khanadarian domain. So they may have seeded this situation in 3D in this timeline, but it's backfiring because it's gathering far more momentum than they had intended it to, and creating a far bigger Great Awakening and a far more unity and far more sovereignty and strength and coming together, which is the one thing that will end the negative structure. So the negative structure is finite, and the thing that brings it to its finished conclusion, its end, is the unification, the alchemical unification of the positive factions and the positive structure. So that's what's happening here, which is what the person said within the question. So the questioner could see this, which is another reason why everything would have opened up for me, because the questioner had answered her own question. So there was no desperation in her asking, because she had already seen the correct answer, even though she placed that into 2 sentences. And obviously my response is coming in a long sort of paragraph with the 9, because of the multi-layered aspect to it. A light wind looks like a backfire on the dark, which is what is occurring with the convoy of chariots in the Khanadarian domain. The dark are using this to their advantage to further their agenda of overlord removal at each domain's governmental level. So one of the bigger parts of their agenda is a changing of the guard, a changing the overlord structure at governmental sort of domain level, council level, so that at the moment, and I've discussed this before when I've talked about the false awakening, at the moment, that looks like an independent movement. So each domain is independent, and that gives the negative structure one type of opportunity. They can use these so-called independent council structures, government structures, to create friction and tension and battle and war and polarity. They can pit one side against the other. So that's something that has been a major tactic within the negative structure. But because the singularity, the eventuality, is about unity, they can't play that game for much longer. So they have to then take the unification, which is the singularity outcome, and switch that as well. So this is why this one village government has always been part of the agenda, because really the one village government agenda is simply the reaction to the alchemical unification, which is the movement from 3D to 5D on this planet. So that was their way of, because they haven't just tried to hijack the timelines and the Indigo uprising on the way to the singularity, they are attempting to hijack the singularity itself and hoping that will, as I say, I use the word appease, hoping that will appease source. It will appease the consciousness quantum field. It doesn't work like that, and appease is the wrong word. But if you were looking at the quantum field as a being that wants this particular eventuality, you'd be trying to appease it by giving it this, which is really similar, but actually the complete opposite. It doesn't work like that. And the word isn't appease. The word is more, I guess, really the best word is superimpose over. But that can't work either. A imposing structure can only ever be finite. The organic always shines through, always. You can't hide the organic. Even if you work at planetary and galactic levels, the organic is always there. So this is what they're trying to do. They're actually hijacking the eventuality, the singularity itself, which is complete unification of the entire dimension. not just the planetary system, but the dimension of the third dimension. It's actually moving that dimension to a higher octave through fourth into fifth. So they're hijacking that and keeping it in third with something that looks like fifth, which is why the 9 use the term false awakening, because the false awakening is actually the ascension itself. And this is what's going to play out in the coming times ahead. So at the moment, we're seeing this false awakening tied up with the great awakening in things like the chariot, the procession of chariots into the Khanadarian domain. That's just one stream. But the false awakening and the true great awakening are tied up together in the ascension itself. So you could actually say false ascension and true ascension. And it's difficult for people to understand what that means if you haven't fully quite processed what ascension means in and of itself, which is a never-ending discovery. Does anyone ever process fully what ascension means when it's actually a raise in frequency through physical evolution? So there are so many multiple levels to the hijack and to the false awakening and real awakening tied in together. And as I've said before, some people are viewing the false awakening or false ascension as just incredibly negative, and they want nothing to do with it. And I can understand that completely, but that's because you're seeing the false awakening and the false ascension as just someone being negative, trying to put a negative spin on what's happening that's beautiful. But it's not me as a conduit or a channel that's doing that. It's the dark negative structure. They've already put the negative spin on it, and I'm just seeing it and telling you about it. That's the difference. And some people just don't like the messages, so they try to shoot the messenger. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And this whole false awakening concept is not going to be received well, even in the truth and spiritual communities, because, as I said, there's a bifurcation there, and I'm presenting the middle ground between that bifurcation within the truth and spiritual community as well. And I hope, I more than hope, I see that there only needs to be a few individuals at that level of understanding to create a critical mass for it. And when you understand the false awakening and the great awakening and what it means, and when you understand the false ascension and the true ascension and what that means, you have become the observer of that event, and you create it, just like the negative structure created that by viewing the singularity and the timelines leading up to the singularity. They actually created the singularity from that perspective. That's what you do, that's what I do, that's what we do together. You only need small numbers at critical mass at that high level of expansion. And when we have enough individuals who are understanding what the false ascension and the real ascension really means, and how to navigate through it and use it as a catalyst for the positive outcome to create the actual real ascension. When you have enough individuals totally understanding that full paradoxical, multi-layered concept, then that creates it. And absolutely, I do see that, of course, because otherwise it wouldn't be there in the timelines. But what I'm saying is the individuals who understand that level to this bluff within a bluff within a bluff within a bluff are the minority within the truth movement and the awakened movement and the spiritual movement. They're the minority. So you've got multiple layers of understanding throughout that entire movement, right down to the people who are sleeping, who are now waking up to something on some level, because the Great Awakening touches every single person in the entire village, in the world of the village. Every member of the village in every domain is touched by the Great Awakening on some level, whether it's false, whether it's it becomes something new that they didn't know before. It becomes a realization that they didn't have before. And even if it's awakened to a false hijacked realization and they're not aware of the hijacking, they're still one notch up in their expansion. But the individuals at the higher levels of expansion, the ones that are seeing all of this, are the ones that will observe that as they process it, as they understand it, and they are the ones creating it. And that's already been written, because time is not linear. And that is what was viewed by the negative structures, and that is what they created. So from that perspective, the negative and the positive are creators, even though they do it in completely different ways. One is done through a giving, a radiation and expansion, and the other is done through absorbing from other. But from the point of view of being the observer, which is a neutral stance, the spectrum from negative to positive are all able to take their place as the observer. So I know that's sort of deep, but if you can run with this concept, then you're one of the individuals creating this, and you are referred to as a grid worker, a galactic grid worker, a dragon rider, a creator of stargates, someone moving through Stargate ascension. You are a map maker, you are a cosmic map maker, you are a creator of the organic matrix. You are also the cosmic alchemist, and you are also the architect. That's who you are. You are the architect. So take those labels, and you don't need to take them at first if you don't understand or process them, but just bear them in mind, just note them, and then when you understand the meaning of all of those, then that's what you become. And that explains Stargate ascension as opposed to ascension. So you've got ascension taking place across the whole village. Every member of the village, every fae in every domain, they're all ascending because they're coming into the next level. They're all raising in their level. There are a few really stubborn individuals who refuse to shift, but they will. They cannot not, because the catalyst is in their faces. So they must shift. So everyone is going through ascension from that perspective. But then you get to the perspective where ascension is 3D to 5D. And that is where there is a huge bifurcation, where individuals ascend to a point and choose, I don't wish to go any further. I don't wish to go into 5D in this physical reality. I'm going to choose regenesis. I'm going to choose to reincarnate again on another planetary system in another dimension. And that's what the whole choice point, the juice choice point, is all about. So the ascension that we talk about is the ascension from 3D to 5D, which are the individuals that are moving to the 5th dimension. And that is a minority when it comes to the overall amount of individuals in the village, but it's still quite a sizable minority that is increasing all the time. But within that, we then have an even more minority group that are going through Stargate ascension. They are the individuals who can process this, who hold the ability for paradoxical consciousness, bilocational, trilocational consciousness. They are the individuals who are able to analyze and process multidimensionality in a unified way. And they are the individuals that create that unified structure, that unified field through their observation when they take the neutral stance and act as the observer. So those individuals who are doing this, I'm talking to you now, you know exactly who you are. You are already in the Stargate ascension system. You are in the moving through the Stargate ascension pathway or journey. Your role from that perspective is to anchor in as many of the individuals moving from the 3rd dimension to the 5th dimension who have taken the choice point for ascension, who did not move through the juice program, or the very rare few who have partaken of juice but have managed to still switch into this 3D, 5D movement, and there are some. Your role as someone going through Stargate Ascension is to anchor in as many individuals as you can into that pathway with whatever it is you are doing. And if you are going through Stargate Ascension, you will be leading this movement in some way, in whatever it may be. You don't have to be a public speaker. You don't have to be a spiritual teacher or a guru or anything like that. You could be working in a very perceived 3D career or job, but you are anchoring in these individuals whenever you get the opportunity to do so. And you can do this in a once removed state. You know, you could be on your own taking the path of the hermit, but you're still able to anchor that in through etheric means, through non-physical means. So completely gone off track there and totally away from this reply here. So let's go back here. The Dark are using this to their advantage to further their agenda of overlord removal at each domain's governmental level. So that's a main part of the agenda, is overlord removal and a changing of the guard, because the changing of the guard is part of the original singularity, and that was the overlord removal and the insertion of the open-hearted, loving, good, peaceful, white hat, good people, the positively polarized individuals. That was what was in the original organic timeline. That's what they saw in the singularity. So this is why the whole agenda of the new village order has been created. It's to superimpose what was organic in their observation. So they want to get there first. They want to do, they want to bring in their superimposed agenda before it happens naturally by the light. And of course, both are playing out. Both are playing out. Who gets to the finish line? You know, that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing right now, which is why when someone asks the question, please comment on the chariots, you can't just say, oh, yes, it's this, or yes, it's that. It's not this, it's not that. It's not like that. It's got a matrix signature to it. Every single event that's part of the Great Awakening and the Indigo Uprising and the revolution of love is going to have a multi-dimensional signature within it. So they can replace, they can replace so-called independent councils in each domain with a one village government rule that is out in the open instead of behind the scenes, because at the moment they have this behind the scenes to a point. They don't have it fully, as I've said before, but they have this already to a point, enough to be able to make waves, if you will. But they want this out in the open. They want it to be accepted by everyone. And not only do they want it to be accepted, they want it to be demanded for. They want the people to say, we want this, because in the organic timeline, the individuals did that. We want this. We don't want this negative structure ruling us. We want unity. We want a Knights of the Round Table reality. We want the good guys in power in the village. This is what the fairies and the pixies and the elves said. And they got it as well. They got exactly what they asked for. So when the Dark Overlords viewed that, they thought, right, we need to come in here so that when the people demand, we don't want this, we want this, we say, okay, we'll remove this and we will give you this and we'll pretend it's the good guys. We'll pretend it's the positive. That's the false awakening, and it's all tied up with the Great Awakening. I hope you can see more how this is intertwined as one rather than two separate things in different areas. It's all tied up together. For the light, we have far more awakening, more sovereignty, more unity, more awareness, more truth, and a breaking through the mainstream media wall in the village, leading to the New Earth Society. So that's what this procession of chariots is creating for the light. That's the win for the light. More awakening, more sovereignty, more unity, more awareness, more truth, and a breaking through the mainstream media wall in the village leading to the New Earth Society. So they're having to, within the reporters within the village, they're having to report on things they'd rather not report on, because whilst they can use that to their own agenda, and they will do, they'll try and report on whatever they need to report on that leads to their agenda. But because there's such a great awakening intertwined within that, they're having to also report on some aspects of the Great Awakening, which is what's happening not just in this area, but in all areas of the Indigo Uprising. For example, when medical fairies speak to the village, the positive medical fairies are now being heard in a smaller way, in a much smaller way than the negative medical fairies. They're being heard now, and they're being given somewhat of a platform. It's only a small part of that platform, but it's breaking through. And so it's constantly a second guessing for the negative to have to think, right, the light's broken through over here. How do we either try to stop that or do damage control or use it to our advantage? How can we create that, make that the problem and bring in the problem reaction solution over here? And all the time the lights are just moving forward in truth, moving forward in truth, moving forward in truth. And life, and helping people, and just naturally beaming their positive polarization and their service to others behavior and thought. They don't need to plan and strategize in the same way, because just being themselves creates this huge pathway of positivity. It's the dark structure that are having to run around to, you know, do damage control wherever they can. And that's getting harder and harder and harder for them to do that. So a unity council at world governmental levels, but structured very differently to the Dark's intentions. So the New Earth Society also leads to a unity council, just the same as the plans for the one village government. This unity council is also at world governmental levels, but it's structured very differently to the Dark's intentions. And as I've explained, one was already in the organic timeline, the other is the superimposing of that, which is a major, major part of the singularity, because it occurs at the time when the fifth dimension is becoming physical within this reality. The positive faction, the New Earth, are creating a white Knights of the Round Table structure. So again, white is not meant to be a color. White is a frequency. It's, you know, it's got nothing to do with anything to do with race. I have people say to me, you know, why use the white black analogy? And I agree, because of the whole sort of racial feelings in our society. It's probably not the best way to explain it. However, we are dealing with such multidimensional concepts that finding metaphors are the ways to present these multidimensional concepts, and these come from the nine, and they present picture to explain these concepts. So the whole sort of race thing is inserted into that as a as something that would stand in its way, if you will, because there are many individuals who are black individuals who are aware of the light and who are in that Stargate ascension field. So when they hear things like white knights, they know instantly that that doesn't mean race. It doesn't mean white people. It means high frequency people, and those people are black as well as white, and every single other race across the world. So sort of just putting that one into perspective, because that sort of you know, comes out, and that perspective, to bring that in, is actually a lower vibration to the metaphors that are being presented, and that in itself is a hijack. Although I know that it comes in from individuals who just don't understand metaphor. and it's difficult to explain to someone who's in that early stage of ascension, that 3D shift. It's difficult to explain to them that metaphor comes in through pattern and through color, through frequency, through sound, through story, through picture. But if it's causing a emotional reaction, then it's catalyzing you into expansion anyway. So it does work in multiple ways. So we have this white Knights of the Round Table structure on the positive frequency, and a Robin Hood society, which is this sort of, in the village, you have like these outlaws. They are stepping outside of society with Robin Hood. Who is Robin Hood? Robin Hood is actually those that are embracing Stargate Ascension. If you want to give that a hierarchical position, it isn't hierarchical, it's circular. But in truth, Robin Hood is everybody, because they're all in their own stage of awakening. Even those who go through the whole Juice protocol and choose regenesis, they're still moving through their own Robin Hood journey within, but they aren't expressing that in their physical reality when they choose to stay in the societal structure that they believe to be protective and good and right. And they would then be part of that faction that looks at the outlaws as those that are outside of the law, meaning they are against the law, meaning that they are criminals. And that isn't what an outlaw is. An outlaw is someone outside of the law, the man-made law, and often that outlaw creates and is part of true law. And all of that is in the singularity as well. This shift from this hijacked legal system to this legal system that is a mirror of source consciousness and is part of true integrity that any individual within a Stargate Ascension field would naturally hold within them. So that could be, if you will, seen as, you know, common law within the village, law of the land rather than law of the sea, which I know very little about, but I see it in the singularity. And that again is something else that will be hijacked because it's been observed by the negative structure. So anything in that singularity and in the timelines leading up to it will be part of an attempt to superimpose over it and create the false awakening within that stream. So these are all the things to look out for in the coming times ahead. So many are very focused on the arrival of the Canadian domain Procession of Chariots. So lots and lots of people are focused on that right now, which is what I saw when I was looking at this situation. And for good reason, as this triggers a huge domino effect within the overall global Indigo uprising. So this movement that's occurring, this procession of chariots into the Canadian domain, is a trigger for a huge domino effect. So it's going to start happening all over. So you've got this main first action in this chariot form, these chariot riders moving forward, and then you have all these other chariots spring up and similar smaller events with smaller chariots or different chariots or no chariots, but they're all being catalyzed by the one event. So it's hugely significant in that sense. However, the nine say again, this is one such movement as many. This is one such movement of many, meaning there are many that are going to trigger huge domino effects. Just like this chariot movement, there are other parts of this uprising that are going to trigger multiple domino effects. So this Great Awakening is huge and multi-layered, and you can understand why the negative are running around trying to sort of do damage control wherever they can and bring in all of these last minute sort of chess moves, and why they've had to plan this for so many years, because the natural movement is that of a snowball. You know, if you're standing at the bottom of a hill and a snowball comes down from the top of the hill, it's going to gather snow all the way down, and it's going to be a huge snowball by the time it gets to the bottom of that hill. That's what the negative are dealing with right now. And as I've said, they're finding it harder and harder to deal with it. So this is one such movement of many as you go forward in your linear time space. So this means as you go forward in time into 2023, 2024, however it may be, I do not get time frames. I am not told about when things will end or stop or change. It is an ongoing journey of awakening, and there are multiple endings and multiple beginnings within that. The false awakening and true awakening are tied up and intertwined within the same event, as I've explained. Those of you in human incarnation look for the duality in all things, the polarity in all things. Is this the light or the dark? Is this the negative or the positive? So I've discussed this already. This is where the human brain tends to naturally go to. It must be this or that. It has to be this or that. It can't possibly be both. And it's hard to understand how it could be both when the two are such huge opposing parallels. You have the negative leading to that, and you have the positive leading to this. How can they possibly be both in the same thing? It's very difficult for the human brain to understand that, but I hope this video has gone some way in explaining to you why this huge opposing polarized situation is being intertwined and why it's intertwined. Just as you say it's both, so that's to the questioner. She could see that. She saw that it was both. But in her viewpoint, so she's moved beyond the it's either this or this. Her expansion, the person who asked this question, has moved beyond the it must be this or that. It's moved into, well, it's both, but her expansion has moved into a linear both, as in it was seeded by this, but the actual backfire or the actual culmination of it or the movement of it has come to that. So it was seeded at point A, but then point B it switched. So that's a higher expansion than seeing this or this, negative or positive, which is great. And it's very easy for someone like this questioner to then shift into the understanding that, well, let's go back even more linear. Let's switch into a quantum field, because we were actually looking at a reality that's already played out, that's now been hijacked by this faction. So it was actually seeded by these individuals, but they don't exist in this timeline. The individuals who seeded this originally aren't in this reality. They're in a reality that was going to play out, but hasn't, because it's been hijacked. So then we get into the multidimensional expansion, and that's when we start to see, instead of right and left, either or, we can see backwards, present and forwards, and then we can go above the structure and actually see all of it. And that's the alchemical unification. And when you see that, that's when you're in Stargate Ascension. That's simply what Stargate Ascension means. The book that I wrote, the third book that I channeled from the 9, is called The Infinite Helix and the Emerald Flame. And that one explains Stargate Ascension. It is full of triggers and catalysts to Stargate Ascension and explains the structure, but that is more advanced than the previous book, Divine Architecture and the Starseed Template, which gives you the very basics of the structure, which is why it's divine architecture, because you're constructing it as you go through reading that book. When you get to Stargate Ascension, you are then putting that into practice in momentum within your awareness. And the teaching that is now coming through, and has been for a while, and that I'm delivering to you now, is the next level from Stargate Ascension, which is the alchemical unification, which is actually unifying the entire matrix structure and all infinite matrices. But anyway, that's going off track. So just as you say it's both, so the questioner knew that it was both, seeded by one faction and taken over and continued by the other. Yet in truth, it's a simultaneous movement, because in this reality, it wasn't seeded by the people, the Fae, but it's a simultaneous movement, because although it's been seeded by the negative and it's flipped into the positive, or flipping into agendas for both, when you actually take a step back and look at the entire quantum structure, and you look at the previous reality that was viewed, which is simply another timeline, that's all it is. It's not something that's gone, it's still there. So when we actually move into the positive movement, we're actually bleeding through into other timelines, or rather that timeline's bleeding through into us. That's why it's a simultaneous movement, signifying the galactic and planetary energetics, which is what's happening galactically. We're moving into a quantum field. Planetarily, we're moving into quantum planetary systems, multiple Earths and the understanding of them, and that will be observed and discovered as we go forward, and it will become part of our reality, that of duality and unity, because you can't find unity in its full integrative sense if you haven't experienced duality or polarity. Duality and polarity, when you are able to embrace both of them, this leads to unity. The twin flame, which is the two, the twin, the two alike systems, duality, polarity, twin, two, and the trinity being the merging of the two. So the trinity is the unification, and that's what the nine mean when they say when you have three, you have all. When you have the trinity, you have all, because the trinity is the merging of the duality, and that is unity. It's the same thing. So this year, it says here, the twin flame and the trinity is one ever-evolving geometry. It's ever-evolving geometrically and presenting in all these different ways. In our minds, in our physical bodies, in our dream space, in our reality, in our families, in our relationships, in our work, in the global situation, in the political field, in the media, in health, in education, in the religious structures, the spiritual structures. It's literally the same geometry everywhere. The twin flame into the Trinity. And this year, your year of 2022 is 22, so 222. So you have three number twos, two being duality, but you've got three of them, three being trinity. The zero is in there as well, which is the 0 point, the neutrality. So 2022 is a signature for unification, just the date. And I know that we may not necessarily actually be in that date when you look at the true time, the true counting system, the true calendar. It's just the Gregorian calendar, but that isn't just the only aspect to take into account. When you're looking at 2022, it becomes numerological. It creates an energetic signature or stamp across the section of time that you are giving to it, simply because it's being given that signature by all souls on the planet. The majority, the absolute majority, even those who are questioning counting systems and calendars, they still understand that this year, in a linear sense, and the way that we explain this year is 2022. Even if they don't subscribe to it, they're still putting their energy into it. So therefore, 2022 becomes a symbol. It moves away from the Gregorian calendar and any counting system. It becomes numerological and it becomes symbolic. So you have three twos. That's duality, polarity, the twin flame. And then the fact that there are three of them gives you the trinity. So you have duality into trinity. And the fact that you have a 0, that's the 0 point, that's neutrality, which creates the unification. So 2022 means, when you decode it, alchemical unification. And that is the frequency of the singularity. That is the frequency of Stargate Ascension. That is the frequency of anyone standing in this truth and in this knowing right now. They are the alchemist. They are the alchemical, unified, organic being. And that's who you are. If you are understanding what I'm saying, then that's you. And it will play out in every way. You'll be seeing this everywhere, this duality into Trinity. So this year, your year of 2022, is the year where this shall be seen in multiple ways, both personally and globally across your world. in the village. So that is the that was the response to the question. So for all those who've been asking for the 9 or for me to comment on the chariot situation, that's the situation, that's the comment. And this will stand for multiple more events yet to come. If I see an event that doesn't have this wrapped up in it, then I will speak about it, because there are going to be some events that are purely coming from a negative faction and they may not backfire. They're in the minority this year and going forward. And there may well be some events that are fully seeded from the positive structure and go straight into New Earth and are not hijacked at all. But those are at the moment, those are the lesser probabilities, that they are there, but that won't be the pattern for the majority of events. Most events have both in, and I'm talking about even cosmic events and events that you hear about within the village media, or anything to do with strife and conflict. It will have the Great Awakening and the False Awakening tied up within the two. It will be the hijack of something that was organic and was observed in the way that I've explained it. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this video, and I hope that you have enjoyed listening, and I will see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.